Welcome, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us. Tonight is the final program in our series on the GNS430 and 530 navigators. We're joined again by Melissa Fowler, who will help us with the chat and the Q&A wrangling duties. And bear in mind, if you want us to answer a question, put it in the Q&A. If you're just chatting amongst each other, use the chat for that. We'll try and keep an eye on both of those. Our main presenter tonight is Captain Mike Jesch, a two-time master CFI, fast lead representative, and 787 captain. Yada, yada, yada. The best part is he owns a Cessna 182 with a Garmin GNS430W installed in it and has now amassed over 15 years of experience using these navigators. Watch your inboxes for some upcoming classes on the Garmin GTN navigators and some interactive workshops using the popular app ForeFlight. But for tonight, let's kick off number 9 in our series and the final and wrap up some loose ends and leftover questions from previous programs. Welcome, Mike.
Hi, Brian. Thanks. It's hard to believe we've been at this over 2 years already. It was just over 2 years ago we did the first one of these. And I don't know about you. I didn't really have a whole lot of expectation about what kind of participation and interest we'd get. But wow, what we've gotten has far surpassed anything I ever even dreamed of having.
Same here, and I understand why, because I get in a rental aircraft with a Garmin GNS430 and I go direct to, and I've always gotten all this, a hard time from you for, hey, you need to know how to do more than just that. And wow, is that unit so capable? And I think everybody's to that extent. They just we don't spend that much time learning our devices, especially if we fly rental aircraft with a bunch of different ones in it. But man, this unit is venerable, it's powerful, and I've learned a lot just by watching you teach this. And again, I look forward to participating a little heavier in the GTN stuff and leading the charge on the ForeFlight stuff, which is my passion.
Yeah, that's going to be awesome. I can't wait for that. And we kicked out this series off with a GNS 101, which kind of a basic introductory level program on this, and we just took off from there, covered a bunch of stuff, and now this will be actually the 10th episode. It's actually part 9, but for those of you paying attention, I slipped in an extra section on one of these that dealt with using a Flightstream 210 to get back and forth. So this is actually the 10th one of these programs, and according to my notes here, we've had over 10,000 people attend these sessions live, and just shy of 100,000 people have watched the recordings. I imagine probably a lot of them watching them multiple times.
Yeah, 900,000 is me watching those.
Yeah. Well, good. Maybe I should go back and watch some too. And I still continue to learn new features of this equipment. I'm going to show you one tonight that I learned just last week. And I actually went through a Garmin page. And so what this shows to me, though, is there is a lot of interest in the pilot population in these, as you say, venerable, some might say ancient navigators. They're actually, I think they're the second generation with a moving map, a colored moving map display on them. The first generation didn't have a moving map, but really powerful devices. And it's also evidenced by the hundreds and hundreds of emails I've gotten from people over the last couple of years asking questions, giving advice on some other ways to do things. We'll touch on some of those things tonight. So let's get this thing going. I do see one question in the chat there. Are we muted? No, we're not muted. We can hear each other talk, and we can't hear you talk. But if you can't hear us, then you probably can't hear me saying you can't.
When we kicked it off, I started out muted, and I missed the button by that much.
I pushed it twice and it's still muted.
Right.
So yeah, first, thanks, Brian, for offering to be a co-host for these series and allowing us to use your Zoom account to do this. It's really made it a powerful tool for both of us to reach out to as many people as we can, and we couldn't have done it without that. So
well, and that's my pleasure. I've learned so much just from hosting and watching you teach this, and the fact that you slipped in another episode without anybody knowing, but everybody probably did know, just tells you a good flight instructor is teaching even when you don't know they are.
Even when you're not paying attention, against
That's
your
right.
better wishes, you're going to learn something, I hope.
Right. Well, excellent. I'm going to leave it to you, and if I'll try and monitor the questions and shoot them to you.
Great. Thanks, Brian, and we'll catch up to you later on in the program.
All right.
I'd also like to say thanks to Melissa Fowler for joining us again. She stepped in after I don't know, something like the third or fourth episode or so, and said, hey, you guys want a little hand wrangling that chat thing? And so she's jumped in very ably on a couple of programs doing that for us. And it's been really nice to have an extra set of eyeballs on that chat to wrangle that down. So thanks, Melissa, and welcome once again. And thanks most of all, again, to you for watching this, all you attendees. Now we've got almost 700 on tonight. We've had as many as just shy of 3,000 on these, and just a ton of you. The interest is definitely there, so that keeps us motivated. A couple of tips I'll give you if you're watching on an iPad, as people type chat messages, if you're getting a little dialog box that pops up that alerts you to an incoming chat message, you can turn that off. I believe there's a button in the upper right corner. If you tap on that, there's going to be a menu item in there, I think, that says something like silence alerts or something like that. So turn that off and get that to stop popping up out of your way there. Also, keep your camera handy, or know how to take a screenshot on your iPad or with an iPhone. I've got a couple QR codes I'm going to be popping up here in just a couple of minutes. And it'll make it a little bit easier as I give you some web links to follow. I've been using this lately in some of my presentations, and it seems to work pretty well. So know how to take a screenshot if you're on a computer or on an iPad. Now, let's kick this off here. I will start the sharing here, and this is part 9, the series finale. And here's the first one of these QR codes I'll give you. This one will take you to Brian's web page on his site that's specifically armed with resources for this program. So you can either type in the URL that you see at the bottom of the screen, or if you take a screenshot of that QR code, you can type it in, and if your phone or device is capable of following those, that'll take you right where you want to get going. The next one I want to show you is several questions have been asked about how do you watch the previous episodes. And the easiest way is I put a playlist on my YouTube channel that has just the programs that are part of this series. So you can follow this QR code and go directly to the GNS series programs. And if you want to rewatch or touch back on some of these other programs that you might have missed, then that's the best way to do that. The next thing you want to look at is my general YouTube channel, which has all of these programs, of course, and any other time I do any sort of presentation or have permission from a presenter to put something up, I'll put that on my YouTube channel. And if you subscribe to this YouTube channel, then you'll get a notification when new content is added. I don't add a whole lot of content, so it's not like your inbox is going to get inundated with mail. But when I do put something up, this is the best, quickest way to get a notification of that. Let's see. The next one I want to give you is the link to the Garmin simulator. This is the simulator that I use in this series. I know in an earlier program I gave you a link to an older version of it. This is, so far as I can tell, the latest version. It is about 15 years old. It's not going to get any newer. But this is the one, it does run on later versions of Windows. The downside of it is that it does not simulate the non-WAAS navigators. It only does the 430W, 530W, and all the variations on that. But this is the one you want to download. This is the one I use in this program, at which I'm running Windows 10 on this computer, and it works great. So these and other useful informations are on Brian's resource page. And one of the questions that I've routinely gotten, starting from the very first program, was, how do you update the database? And at the time, we didn't know how to do it. Since then, we've had a couple attendees sent me some information on how to do it, and I've updated my own. It's still not exactly current. It's still a couple of years old, but it's better than it used to be by a long shot. So if you follow this link on Brian's webpage, you'll get a version of the database from about 2017, which is about 10 years newer than the original one that the simulator came with. The problem was that older version didn't have a tremendous number of approaches in the system. It didn't have a lot of RNAV GPS approaches that are WAAS enabled. So they have LPV or maybe LP or even LP plus V minimums available. And there are much more of them now in this newer database. Still a little bit old, but better. And the other problem with using an older one is if you're looking at an approach on your iPad and you'd like to be able to do that approach in the simulator and see how to manipulate the simulator to do it, you just couldn't do it with the old database. So your odds are much better with this one. And there are probably more modern versions of this. If any of you have a more modern version of it, please send it to me and I'll make it available. What you need to do is download this file that's linked to from this website and on Brian's page. And you're going to navigate yourself to this directory on your computer. This is where the Garmin simulator stores its files. And you're going to look for a file called worldwide.bin. You're going to replace that file with the new one that you just downloaded. And what I did was I took the old one and I renamed it to be old worldwide.bin. And then I plugged the new one in there so I can switch back and forth to either database if I wanted to do that. So that's my sneaky trick, and maybe that'll work for you. Like I say, I've been trying to figure out how to get a hold of a later version of this, and I just haven't had any luck with it yet. Before I leave this presentation mode here, one of the questions I want to ask is, one of the attendees in an earlier program asked about, he's had an intermittent problem with losing GPS position on his Navigator. And it's funny, the very first student that I taught using this Navigator 2, I talked about this. I said, if your GPS ever loses position, here's what's going to happen. And then told him, you'll never see this. There's no way to simulate this or turn it on. It just happens. And if it does happen, this is what you're going to see. And the GPS loses position. You get a yellow INTEG sign in the lower left corner. It says the GPS is losing integrity, and eventually you'll get to a dead reckoning mode or just lose position entirely. And as it happened, I briefed this on this pre-flight briefing with the student, and then it happened on that first flight. And I said, hey, I didn't expect to see this, but here it is. And I didn't know at the time what was going on, but then I had it happen in another client's airplane. And so I started doing a little bit of research, and the first thing to do is, if this is happening to you, I'll show you this on the Navigator in just a minute. If you bring up the satellite status page, you're going to see a series of bars that indicate the signal strength of each satellite that you're receiving. If these are all blank, then you are probably subject to some interference that's happening. And as I did some more research on this, I found this page in the Garmin installation manual. And if you are in an IFR installation, which I would venture to guess most of us are, you're required to do this VHF COM check as one of the final steps in the installation procedure of your Navigator. I'm not going to read this whole thing to it. Just suffice it to say that you need to do this check. And what was significant to me was I took a picture of the screen on my client's airplane when it happened. This check involves tuning in a COM frequency and then transmitting for quite a long time, 35 seconds. And you want this INTEG flag not to show up. And then there's several frequencies you need to do this with. What is that, 6, 12, 13, 14 frequencies? And if you're using the 8.33 kilohertz, there's a few more. And it turned out with my second client's airplane, we were on one of these frequencies. And I checked it again on the ground. I pulled up this document. I happen to have it on my iPad. And I dialed in that frequency and I looked at the signal strength screen and I pushed the push to talk. And instantly when I did that, all the satellite signal strength bars disappeared. And when I let go of the button, it took a few seconds and we got the satellites back. So that's what was causing that interference. And if you're having this interference, then the installer just needs to put in what they call a notch filter in one of the antenna signals cables, and that will alleviate this interference problem. So with that now, let me see, come back to here. I'll put my smiling face back on here.
Just a quickie, Mike. Someone was asking if the updated database had SIDS and STARS departure procedures in the new database, that updated one you told us about. Yes,
they are in the old database as well, but they're really old ones. So you know how SIDS and STARS will have a number, they have usually a 5-character name that's the name of the first fix on the procedure, and then a number. That number changes in increments with each revision of that. And so the old database has got some really old ones. The newer one has got some more modern ones.
Right. At least there's some in there though, so that's cool.
Yes, yeah, they're definitely in there for sure. In fact, I did a presentation on SIDS and stars. I was afraid you're going to ask me. I don't remember off the top of my head which one that is, but I did a whole program on SIDS and stars. So look that one up.
SIDS and stars was number 6. Again, the link to all those on your YouTube page and of course my website that we've linked here too. Yeah, that number 6.
Great, thank you. So armed with this now, I'm going to share the Navigator screen. This is what your 430 looks like when it's installed on the in your panel, something like this. We have this on-off button here. The first thing to do is we want to tell it what kind of unit we want to use. And for now, I'm going to use the Garmin 430W. One of the complaints I've gotten from quite a lot of people, unfortunately, is I do spend most of my time using the 530 as the demo. And that's simply because it's a little bit bigger screen and it's a little bit easier to move around on. It's not that I don't like the 430, I do, but it's just a little bit easier to show some things using the 530 instead. So I thought, let's start off today with the 430. One of the things I want to point out here before I turn this unit on is one of the splash screens that we're going to see at the beginning of the startup procedure is going to tell you the software version. In a moment, I'm going to talk about some of the differences between the 430 and the 530. And one of the differences is in the 530, there's an aux menu that you can look up the software version. I don't see that, at least it's not in the simulator version of the 430. So I wanted to point this out. What we're looking for here is the main software version 3.0. And that screen quickly goes away, goes to the next page as it's conducting its internal self-test procedures. So it's going to finish all these, and we see the obstacle database expiration dates. One question I did get is, do you have to keep the obstacle database updated? And that answer is no. I usually update my obstacle database, maybe every 5 or 6 years. But the navigation database is current all the time. It's required to be for executing instrument approaches. So we keep our nav database current. The obstacle database is old. And if you think about it, the obstacles don't usually move very much. The one exception to that is in the Midwest, we're seeing an awful lot of wind farms being built. And these are very tall. And the fact of the matter is, even the sectional charts can't keep up with this proliferation of wind farms. So even those are not current. It takes several months, maybe a year or more to get those obstacles updated. But I would advise you that when you're going through this startup process on your Navigator, that you don't just push enter a bunch of times and don't pay attention to what's happening. You do need to look at this. I believe I covered this in parts 1 and 2 of the series. The main thing is when you get here to this page and you get the Worldwide Aviation Database expiration date, you see you've got an effective date and an expiration date. Make sure that expiration date is in the future. And if you've got an old one, it's going to be in yellow. And you need to make sure that you're between these two dates if you're going to be doing instrument procedures, particularly approach procedures. Once you've verified that, now you can just press the enter button and go to the OK. And I see a lot of people, particularly VFR pilots, will skip quickly through this. My students know better, and they linger for a moment on this page, and you want to make sure that the self-test is correct. You got a half left and a lateral CDI half left, lateral flag out of view, vertical CDI half up and flag out of view. So look to your indicator for your GPS and make sure this is the case, that you got the needle half left, half up. You got no flags or anything indicating in here. You want to see that the OBS matches where the arrowhead is pointing on here. And if you move that, you should see it moving on there. That means that the navigator is talking successfully to the indicator that you're going to use to navigate with. One of the questions I got is, does this work even on an electronic type flight display? On say a G1000 or a G500, or I've got a client with an Aspen? And the answer is yes, they do. And you're looking for all these same things. And in fact, my one client has a GTN 750 and a 650, and he can select both or either GPS navigator on his course pointer, and he checks them both before an IFR flight. Actually, he checks them before even a VFR flight, just to make sure everything's still working right. So if all this stuff is good, then now we can press OK, and it's going to take you to that page. It kind of got off that page real quickly there. Here's the page that's going to show you these signal strength bars that I was talking about. These navigators, I understand, will look at as many as 12 satellites, and you're looking to see some signal strength here. Usually it's a little slow to get the first 1 or 2, but then they start really coming in quickly. And as soon as you've got 4 or 5 of these things, then it says, okay, I got enough satellites that I know where I am, I know what time it is, I can go ahead and navigate. So it takes you off of this screen and back to the main navigation page. People have asked me, what did the D's mean in there? And the D means that satellite is transmitting differential GPS data, or WAAS data, into the navigator. It's just kind of a gee whiz interesting thing for you. I could get into a whole bunch of interesting stuff here. Here's where each satellite is physically in the sky. You have your estimated position uncertainty and all this stuff. It's not really very important for us. Suffice it to say that if you've got more than just a handful of satellites that you're receiving successfully here, that everything is good. All life is a sunny day. Well, except for today, if you're in SoCal. We got over an inch of rain at my house today. And so once it fixes its position, it will drop you off and show you on the map where you are. The next thing I want to point out is this message light. I know I've talked about this before. Nothing drives me crazier than a flashing message light. This navigator is trying to talk to us, and it needs to tell us a little something. So let's listen to it and push this button, and it sends us this message that says, do not use for navigation. So obviously this is a simulator. We're not going to use this to navigate an airplane. But that message is still there. You can see that the message light is still on, but now it's not blinking anymore. And that just says that you have acknowledged that message. Basically, it's not trying to shout at you. There's nothing new that it has to tell you. So if you push the button again, you'll get the message pops up that says do not use for navigation. So we're going to see this pop up in several other instances over the course of the evening. So keep an eye on that. I did get some questions about other versions of the simulator. This particular version I'm using comes directly from Garmin. If you fly Microsoft Flight Simulator, or you fly X-Plane, or even if you fly a Redbird, there are simulations of these navigators available in all those platforms and a lot of others. And the problem with those are that Garmin will not give to those companies the software code that runs the machine. So it's not an exact representation. It's pretty good most of the time, but the software engineers at, say, Redbird or Microsoft have to go look at a 530 in the world and push some buttons on it, poke it around and see how it behaves, and then they try to write code that makes it do that. So it's never a perfect representation, but it gets pretty good, gets you in the ballpark. You can kind of learn the buttonology with it most of the time, but it's not perfect. The better one is probably exactly this simulator, but it doesn't interface directly to any of these other flight simulators. If you wanted to fly your Redbird with it, that's just not possible. So I did have a question about somebody had asked about a Cessna 208, a Caravan version of the 530, and they don't make different versions of the Navigator for different airplanes. If you see a 530 in a Caravan, it's the same as the one in my 182, and it's the same as the one in your Mooney or your Bonanza or what have you. They're all the same. There is a what was I going to say? Oh, if you can work a G1000, you can work a 430 or 530. If you use the flight plan button on the primary flight display, it pops up a little version of the flight plan that looks just like the one on the 430 or the 530. And if you push the flight plan button over on the multifunction display over on the right, you get about a half a screen version. It's much more complete. You can put in airways most of the time on those. You can put in altitudes to set up vertical navigation, a whole bunch of other things. So Different software versions. Remember, I showed you when we first turned this on, we got a software version. If you're still using an older version of the operating software, you might not have the capability of doing, say, LP approaches or LP plus Vs, or certain types of RNAV procedures. Those required a software update. And in my installation, when we installed it 15 years ago, we had, I want to say it was version 3.3 or maybe 3.4. And now they're running version 5 point something or other. And we didn't get those LP plus Vs and LP approaches until we updated that software. So make sure you do that. Let's see, we already covered the database questions. Anything else we can do quickly here while I'm steadying up to see what's next?
Yeah, there's a question about will the 530 be able to capture text clearances, or how to capture? And do you have any? I don't think that you can, but I didn't want to answer that without asking you.
Not so far as I know. No, the closest thing that you can do is put your flight plan in a tablet EFB like for flight on an iPad and transfer that flight plan into the 530 if you have a FlightStream 210 installed.
Right.
It's really the only way to do that.
Another anonymous attendee asked, he said, I have trouble inputting a non-approach fix as I approach an approach and it's listed fixes. Can you show any tricks on that? Like inputting a non-approach fix as approaching an approach fix.
I'm not quite sure what that means. You want to add a fix that's not part of the approach just before?
I'm guessing so. I'll ask that person maybe to rephrase the question, ask it again, and we'll try it again.
All right. Yeah. And I will probably get to a real similar situation here where I'm intending to go with some of the discussion tonight. So again, like most of these, I've got a kind of I hesitate to stretch and call it a script, but I've got a list of things that I'd like to cover, but I want to leave plenty of open time for questions too. So if you have a question on a technique or a skill that you want me to demonstrate here, please throw that in the Q&A and Melissa or Brian will make sure that I see that and we can address that. Another thing I've gotten a lot of questions on is back on this nav page. We see these over on the right-hand side, we see these numbers being displayed, information we can display or not display on here. And one question I've gotten a couple of times is you fly a flight school airplane or you share an airplane with a couple other pilots, and everybody has their own method of setting these things up. And so first I want to show you how to do that. If you click on the menu button, you get this context sensitive menu that varies based on what you're looking at right now. In this particular case, we've got all these menu items we can do. I want to touch on the change fields and setup map in a moment. But first thing is if we turn those data fields off, that gives you a little bit more real estate on the screen. Sometimes this is helpful, particularly on the 430 that's got the smaller screen. But if you like to see those fields, and maybe you'd want to turn these off if you have an iPad or some other tablet, and you've got a lot of your navigation information is displayed on that tablet. Maybe you'd rather see it there and not see it on the 430 where you've got limited real estate anyway. So that might be a reason to turn those data fields off. So let's turn them on though. And what this question relates to is this top one is waypoint. Next we have desired track, distance, and ground speed. And you can change these windows to be something else. So if we change the fields, now you see this flashing on the waypoint. And if you learn nothing else, remember this. Remember that over here, this right knob, the big knob moves where the cursor is, and the little knob changes what's underneath the cursor. So if we want to change this top box, we want to change it away from waypoint. If you just twist the little knob one click, it'll pop up as this menu, and it will show you all the options that you have for what you'd like to show there. Maybe you'd like to see the cross-track error. So if you press enter, now we see cross-track error displayed in this top box instead of the waypoint. So the situation now is you've got a whole bunch of different pilots flying this airplane all the time, and every time you get in the airplane, it's not what you want. Maybe you want the default ones. Maybe you want different settings. And one problem is you can't save different profiles and have it store, okay, well, Mike wants it set up this way, and Brian wants it set up that way, and Melissa wants it set up that other way. It's not like the fancy new keys in your car. You get a key 1, a key 2, and a key 3. and whoever's sitting in the car, that's the seat settings and mirror settings that it sets up. We can't do that. Remember, this is only second generation GPS technology. But what we can do is we can reset to the defaults. So you just pop this menu back up and you see the bottom item in that menu is restore defaults. If you tap on that, now everything goes back to the way it was when it came out of the factory. Most of these programs that I've been doing here, I think I've set these up with the default displays just because I find that most convenient. And again, if you are also using a tablet, maybe you want to think about what you have displayed on the Navigator versus what you have on your iPad. On my 530 installation, for instance, I had the bottom window set up to display altitude, just so it works better with the simulator here, that when I set an altitude in the autopilot, I can see what altitude it's actually at. So that's how you change those menus. A lot of pilots will like track or north up. I don't know why you'd want north up, but a lot of pilots do. If we pop this up and we go to setup map and enter, we see the group. This is the map group, and we want the orientation. I'm a track up kind of guy. All my airplanes I've flown at work for the last 30 years are all track up, so that's what I like. But if you happen to be a north up kind of a person, then you can just twist that little knob, and then we're going to move this up to north up and press enter, and now voila, we've got a north up menu. As I say, I prefer track up. It makes it easier for me to fly approaches and so forth, and I'll touch on that in a little bit. You can also put track up, north up. There's also desired track up. So if you put desired track up, your pink line is always going to be straight up and down in the screen, and you'll see your airplane wandering around it back and forth. Maybe that's your bag. I don't know. But my preference is track up. That's how you change that. We got auto zoom, we got land data, aviation data. You can turn these on and off, and that helps to declutter the map. Let's see, we got map mode here. So some people had asked, let me see if this is where it is. So this is where you set up on their different zoom levels. If you've got waypoints turned on, for instance, you want them to show up in smaller than the 150 mile range, let's say, or active flight plan. There's different settings here. I tend not to play around with these a whole lot, but it's worthwhile perhaps poking around in some of these to make it the way you want and see what you like to have. One thing I would suggest though is I'm going to look over here in the aux chapter. Remember, when we're at the regular nav page now, the big knob over here changes. I call it the chapter. Garmin calls it the book. The book that we're in right now, we're in the nav book. And if we spin this, the big knob 2 clicks over, we get the aux book, or I call it chapter. The little knob changes within that chapter which page you're on. So here's your page counter. We're on page 1 of 4. If we go to the right here, and I'm looking at airspace alarms. Now, just wanted to touch on this a lot. I fly with a lot of IFR pilots who have these turned on, and sometimes it's kind of a nuisance to get an airspace alarm every time you enter a class Bravo or Charlie or Delta airspace. As an IFR pilot, maybe you want those off. As a VFR pilot, you probably want them still on, just so that you don't inadvertently blunder into some airspace. This is one more thing that might help you avoid a pilot deviation. And those are never fun. Okay, differences between these 430, 530 differences. The 430 is smaller, the 530 is bigger. That's pretty simple. I did get some questions on a 400 or a 420. And these just remove other features. The 530 has both, or the 430 has both the comm and the nav radio. If you have a 420, you have a comm only. You don't have a VOR receiver. And if you have a 400, then you have neither a comm nor a VOR receiver. All you have is a GPS navigator. Now, they didn't make a 410. A 410 actually is a watch. But if they did make a GNS 410, I got to guess it would probably have a GPS navigator and a VOR receiver, but no comm radio. And they are interchangeable. All these same features, all the stuff I've talked about with the 430 and the 530 also work with a 400 and 500, 420, 520. Most of them work with a non-WAAS. There's some things that don't. Now, one of the things about being the smaller screen on the 430 is we can't display as much information over here. And one of those is the nav frequency identification. On the 530, we've got enough room there that we can show some more stuff. On the 430, we don't. I did have one person suggest over here on the nav page that you can come over here to the default is page 5. It might be different in your airplane. But down at the bottom, we have this box, and this attendee had said that he came down here. Actually, he pressed the menu and changed fields. And here again, we see our flashing. We could change these to make them different, indicate different information. And what he did was he came down here to airport and changed this to VOR. So instead of nearest airport, now it's showing you the nearest VOR, and it gives you the bearing and distance from that nearest VOR. The problem is, this is just the nearest out of the database. This is not the actual one that you have tuned in over here on your nav radio. So it might be useful, but it might not be what you're looking for. So I tend to just leave this one on the nearest airport if I'm in a 430 as Garmin intended, and away we go. Well, there. Let's see. So as I said, essentially the functions are identical. The 530 has one more button down here that the 430 does not. Got 5 buttons across here, and that button, if you're a 530 user, you know that button is labeled VNAV. On the 430, we just physically don't have the button, so they put the VNAV in another menu. It turns out it's in the nav last page. So if you take that little knob and switch it all the way over, you get the VNAV information. And I discussed VNAV in an earlier program. I want to say it was version program 6, but don't quote me on that. I meant to put that in my notes. I got it on some things, but I don't have it on everything. So this is one of the differences. That's where you'll find that information. As a general operating tip here, you'll see this one frequency is highlighted in reverse video. That's the one that changes when you change your COM tuning knob. If you want to tune in a VOR frequency, you just push this knob and it moves that cursor into the standby nav radio window. So now we're changing that standby nav. You cannot change the active frequency directly with this knob. You can only change the standby. And my technique is, my suggestion is, my best practice is that when you're done tuning a nav frequency, push that button immediately and put it back on the COM frequency. Because invariably, what's going to happen is you're going to get a frequency change. You're going to tune in a VOR down here. You're going to get a frequency change. You're going to make that VOR active. And 2 seconds later, air traffic control is going to call you and say, hey, switch to my frequency 132.2. And you're going to try to do 132, and it's hard to figure out why that one's not changing. So if you give it long enough, if you don't touch the unit for 30 seconds, it'll move back. But I just like to drive the bus and put that back myself to where I almost always want it. Okay, I'll come back to 530 differences in a little bit. I can demonstrate some more on that. WAAS to non-WAAS differences. One of the earlier programs I did was specifically on instrument approach procedures. I did one on SIDS and STARS. I did another on approach procedures. And if you have a non-WAAS navigator, you will not get any LP, LPVs, LP plus Vs, LNAV plus Vs, or L/VNAV approaches. They just don't exist in there. And the other difference you'll see with a non-WAAS is, we're going to get to this in a little bit, this lower left corner where we see ENR right now, that's the navigation mode that the unit is currently in. Right now it's in en route mode. We don't have any kind of a route programmed in our flight plan, so it doesn't know where we are versus our route, and so it says we're in en route navigation. That's 2 mile deviation from full scale left to full scale right. When you're on an approach, you'll see APR enunciated here in reverse video. That's your approach navigation. That's only on a non-WAAS unit. If you have a WAAS unit, you will see enunciated the mode of navigation for that approach. So you'll see LPV, LP plus V, LP, whatever it is. So that's a non-WAAS difference. The internal computer processor is faster on the WAAS units than the non-WAAS units. The biggest thing that is kind of hard to get heads around for a lot of IFR pilots, if you fly IFR, is if you have a non-WAAS navigator, you need to plan a destination alternate that has something other than an RNAV approach available and legal for you to use. That's available that day. It's not NOTAMed out of service. You have the charts for it. All that stuff. There are other interpretations that say it's either the destination or the alternate must have a terrestrial approach, a VOR approach, an ILS approach. If you have a WAAS navigator, you can plan both a destination and an alternate that both have RNAV approaches. The one caveat is that for the flight planning purposes, you need to plan on non-precision minimums at the alternate. So even if there's an LPV approach available, you need to use a non-precision approach minimums, 802 or a non-standard minimum. Was contacted recently, just a week or two ago, by a pilot who had a non-WAAS 530 and a WAAS 430 installed in the same airplane. And it's kind of interesting. The 430 was connected to his Flightstream 210 and his GTX 345 because that newer 1090, the ADS-B out transponders need to have a WAAS GPS data source. So he had to use the 430. Normally, if you have two of these installed, you can cross-fill from one to the other and communicate. And we see over here in the setup menu, see where it is exactly. I think it's in here. Oh, it's not available in the simulator, but one of these items in the setup is crossfill on and off. Yeah, you see it's grayed out here on aux page 1. The simulator can't do this, but normally if you have two WAAS navigators installed, let's say, you can turn that on. So when you make a flight plan modification in one, it automatically gets sent to the other. But if you have one of your navigators as a non-WAAS and the other one is a WAAS receiver, you can't do that. So they have different databases, different communication protocols. They can't talk to each other. So that's why that happens. Okay, illegal nav ident. I swear I remember seeing one time, you can't see it on the 430, but if you remember here on nav page 2, on the 530, just below the nav frequency, there's a box that when you tune in a VOR station, it actually listens to the Morse code identifier. And once it has decoded that Morse code identifier, it looks up that station in the database, it knows your position relative to that VOR. And the next box between these two on the 530, and I'll show that to you in a little bit, will show you the identification. It'll show you the radial that you're on from it and the distance from it. There isn't room on the 430 for that data. And the question is that a legal identification? And I've been looking for it. I can't find it, but I vaguely remember when I first got my Navigator that it said, yes, that is a legal identification on that station. The Navigator receiver has listened to that Morse code and decoded it and displayed it for you. The SL30, I have my second radio is an SL30 in my airplane. It does the same thing. The 430 doesn't do that, so you do have to listen to the Morse code.
It's my understanding that that is a legal identification.
Yeah, that's mine. Now, the question has come up, though, in the case of the GTN. I'm going to cover that more in future programs when we get over to the GTN. But when you plug that in on a GTN, it shows that identifier immediately before it's even had a chance to listen to it. And I've been trying to find some text about that, and I don't see it on the GTN. So I think that's a difference between the two, and I'm going to be researching that. So if one of you attendees has an answer for that, can point me toward a legal reference on it, I really appreciate that. Thanks for sending that. Okay, a lot of questions have come up on the question of load versus activate approach, and these have come up from since we started the series in episode 1 all the way up through. I still continue to get emails on this question. So it's a very common question. And so I don't know that I will definitely finally answer that one here today, but let me touch on it again. So the first thing for instrument pilots, if you want to load an instrument approach into your Navigator, you push the procedure button and you get this menu that says select approach. So you press enter on that item and we get, if you don't have anything programmed in there, it seems to do the nearest airport. So here's an airport nearby, Seal Beach, and it shows me all the approaches available at this airport. Let's say we want to do the VO, let's say we want to do that RNAV. 22 left approach. So we select that approach. Then it asks us, do we want to do vectors to final or do we want to do the transition from Pomona? I constantly get questions on the vectors to final. I'm going to touch on that a little bit more later on when we get into the meat of this thing. There are very few circumstances where vectors to final is the right thing to do. It can lead to a lot of confusion. It might simplify some things, but it can confuse some other things. So let's pick a transition. And now we see this in here and we get a load versus an activate. So if we have this option, in some cases you won't get the load option. You'll get just the activate option. We'll touch on that in a moment. The question is, what's the difference? The load option first will load the entire procedure into the Navigator as an active flight plan. So it'll load all the fixes from the selected initial approach fix through any intermediate fixes, the final, the missed approach point, missed approach hold point, all that stuff. The difference between the load and the activate is the activate will do that same thing. It still loads the approach into the Navigator, but here's the crucial part. It starts navigating immediately from your present position direct to the initial approach fix that you selected. So it might be what you want to do. It rarely is, but if it is, and we'll touch on that in a little bit, why might it be what you want to do? I went into more detail on that in the program on approaches. So if you want a full explanation, you can go there. So in this case, I'm just going to load it for now. So it's going to leave the rest of my flight plan in place. It's going to put this flight plan in the end of it, and away we go. So once you activate that or you load that approach, the next thing it does is it takes you back over to the flight plan chapter, and it shows you your active flight plan is from Seal Beach to Seal Beach, from the airport direct to the Pomona VOR, and then through the fixes on the approach. Oh, by the way, one other thing I did want to touch on here, I glossed over it too quickly, and I promised I wouldn't do that. While you're looking at this review page, you've got your airport up here, your approach down here, and your transition down here. You got a little top-down view here. Take a moment to look at this lower right corner, the main map portion. This is going to tell you what kind of navigation mode it's anticipating being able to give you for this approach. So we're going to expect to see an LNAV plus V annunciation when we get on this approach. Okay, so that has loaded the approach. And let me see. Okay, we got all that. So another question I constantly get is, let's go ahead and put this simulator in motion here for a little bit. We'll go along a nice cruising speed here. We'll give it 2,000 feet. And we're going to be in heading mode right now. So I'm just flying heading of north. And I want to show a couple things. I've had questions on this before, and I don't think I've quite spent enough time on it. One thing is we notice this flashing message button. Now it says we want to set the course to 025. And that's because the desired track from this course it wants to navigate is from Seal Beach to Pomona. The desired track is 025. And I don't have 025 set on my course pointer. So if I set that over to 025, now that message went away. And the point here is always keep your bugs updated to what you want to be doing right now, whether it's a course pointer, a heading pointer. Even if you're tracking a course, I recommend having your course pointer, your heading bug rather, set to the heading that will line you up on that course. If you have an altitude bug, it should be set on your cleared altitude. If you have an airspeed bug in your airplane, that should be set to your desired airspeed. Always keep these bugs up to date. Just simplifies a whole bunch of things. So we're carrying off our business here. We're flying some weird direction. We were cleared direct to the Pomona VOR. The question is, what does it mean to go direct versus direct to? Direct to versus activate a leg. And how do you do that? I used to teach another way. I teach a different way now. We're in the flight plan here to activate the leg. So let's say I did actually want to get on that line between the airport and this VOR. So I'm going to give myself a cursor. I'm going to take the big knob. I'm going to move it down to the waypoint that ends the leg. And I'm going to press menu. And you get this context sensitive menu pops up. And here the first option in there is activate leg. Is that really what I want to do? And I say, yes, that's what I want to do. So I'm going to activate that leg. And that's the leg I'm doing. If I put the autopilot into nav mode, it's going to pick up a heading that will intercept that leg. And away we go. So this is what you should use if you are cleared to intercept, you're being vectored for an approach, and you're given a heading to intercept the approach, the final approach course, let's say. You should be using this feature, this activate leg feature, where you highlight the fix at the end of the leg menu and activate leg. In that case, you get a vector to the to intercept that leg. You should not do direct to that leg. If you do that instead, we give ourselves a cursor, we come down here, we highlight the fix that we want to go direct, that we want to intercept that leg to. If you press direct to it, it's going to go present position, direct to that VOR. It's going to be a course 036. If we did that instead, remember where that course line was pointing, we can kind of get an idea of it here. If we activate that, now we're going present position direct there, which is not the one that we wanted to do. So this is where you get into trouble. This is where I know a couple of people who have busted instrument check rides by doing that. So don't do that. Use activate the leg when that's appropriate. Use direct to the fix when that's appropriate. And make sure you know the difference. Now that activate leg only works if you are navigating directly to if you have a flight plan already created. So what I want to do here now is I'm going to get this thing set up to start to do what I wanted to do here with this leg tonight. What I'm going to do is we're going to be on the ground at Fullerton. We're going to make a short, quick flight over to Chino, and we're going to go through the whole process of loading up a flight plan. Now, one of the questions I got was, how do you delete the active flight plan? And that's real easy. You just go to the active flight plan, you press menu, and you can scroll down here to delete flight plan. Press that, delete all waypoints in the flight plan. Yes, no, yep, and voila. Now we got nothing. So we do still have this pink line because we told it we wanted to go direct to something. So that's what it's doing, but it's actually not. There aren't waypoints loaded in the database for that.
If you want to intercept a course, Mike, can the direct enter work for that as well? Well, that's another way, right?
Yes, direct enter will activate that waypoint. And I used to teach that, and I no longer teach that because it does exactly the same thing as the menu activate leg. I just think it's confusing. And a lot of the people error. I would say again?
Yeah, there's more room for error. If you don't know this, right?
Yeah, they're both a three-step process, and only the middle step is different by one little thing. And most pilots I was trying to teach it to just get so confused by it. So I found it better just to make a hard line between them and say direct to, use that one, activate a leg, use the menu.
Understand. Okay.
Okay, so another question that I got a lot is, how do you initialize the position of the simulator? And that is, if you're in the simulator here, you can just pull down the options menu, initialize position, and type in where you wanted it to start. So I'm going to type that I want it to start at Fullerton, my home base. Nice little airport in sunny Southern California. And if you want to go to Disneyland or Knott's Berry Farm, that's the best place to go. So I have a clearance for you, advise ready to copy. Grab your scratch paper and your pen or your scratch pad, whatever your favorite device is. You are cleared to the Chino Airport. After departure, turn left heading 120. Radar vectors, Seal Beach. Victor 8, Paradise. Direct. Climb and maintain 2000. Expect 5,000, 10 minutes after departure. Departure frequency 125.35. Squawk 4789. And I'm not going to expect all you guys to read this back to you. So we're on the ground here at Fullerton, and we're going to make this flight plan in here. And so you push the flight plan button, you push the cursor to get yourself a flashing cursor here. Remember that the big knob moves the waypoint, although right now there's nowhere for it to move because there's only that one waypoint. The little knob changes what's underneath that cursor. So we have one little click on the little knob, we'll start entering the airport name. So we're going to start with the airport. And we were cleared to radar vectors to Seal Beach. So the next fix we're going to put in here is Seal Beach. And that's a VOR in southwestern United States. We don't want the one in Colombia. Accept that one. Yep, that's good. We're going to go to Paradise, PDZ. Oops. And away we go. There is a quicker way if you have stored the flight plan already. Notice when we push that flight plan button, we're now in the flight plan chapter or flight plan group. We're on page 1. Page 2 is your flight plan catalog. So this is where you're going to find any stored flight plans that you may have created over the years. You can highlight the one that you want. You can press menu and you get this menu that says activate that flight plan. Sure. So in this case, I added the Ollie intersection in there. And if we look at our route here, we can zoom out a little bit. We can see we got Seal Beach, and then we've got Ollie intersection, and then we've got Paradise and some others. Okay, so we are cleared for takeoff. So we'll pick up our speed here. We're gonna fly heading, oh, actually before I do that, I just want to, I'm gonna stop screen share for a moment here, and I wanna show you what this looks like. Yeah, let me see. I think I have to move that menu over there so we don't cover it up too much. So this is the Fullerton chart here now. We got the, sorry, it's the Los Angeles low altitude chart. Here's the airport. Here's the Seal Beach VOR. Here's Victor 8 to Paradise, and then direct to the airport. Just so you get a little lay of the land here. One thing I want to show you though is the course that's depicted on the low altitude chart on Victor 8 out of Seal Beach is 058. So remember that number here, and I'm going to show you something. Let me stop that. We'll come back over to our Navigator, and if we were to look at the flight plan, it's not there. We have to activate the leg. So let me activate this leg into Ollie. Menu, activate leg. Fly from Seal Beach to Ollie. Yep, that's what I want to do. See, the desired track is 061. So this is a common question I get a lot. Why is the course in the GPS different than the course on the chart? And remember that this number is the GPS waypoint out of the GPS database, and the GPS database uses today's modern version of the magnetic variation. So what is that, you ask? Let me show you here. We'll switch back to my chart here. It's a little bit hard to find on an IFR chart, but if we put up the VFR TAC chart, we have a magnetic variation line here that moves right by the Seal Beach VOR. If we scroll this down, it's 11 degrees and 45 minutes east. So, all right, fair enough. 1145, remember that number. And what I want to show you now is this is this what I wanted it to be? No. Get the wrong thing here. Sorry about that. I'll pull up Navaids. This is the easiest way I've found to look this up. If we look at the Seal Beach VORTAC, notice this VOR was last surveyed in 1975, and at that time the variation was 15 degrees. So the current is 1145. When it was installed, it was 15. So there's your 3+ degrees of variation difference. That's why the VOR course is different from a GPS course. Makes perfect sense, right?
If only we had the technology to get that data into our charts.
Yeah, wouldn't that be nice?
Yeah.
Okay, so back to our navigator, we got our flashing light. It says set course to 061, so I'm going to set that to 061. We're going to take off, and we're going to start our climb. We'll climb up to 2,000 feet is what we were cleared to. And if we put this over here, we got altitude. So we're already up at 2,000 feet. That happened pretty quick. Okay, any of you fly out of this Southern California area here, you know, okay. You know that we're going to get this 120 heading, and we're going to take off and fly to the south there. It should be turning. Oh, no, because my heading bug is still on the runway heading. Now, remember, you have to wait until you're 400 feet above the departure runway elevation before you start your turn. So we start our turn, we're on our way, and now ATC says cleared direct Aheim intersection, which is the first fix on this airway. So the classical, typical way to do that would be to go direct, and we're going to put Aheim. And we want to activate direct to Aheim. Yeah, sure, we'll do that. So let's press enter. We put it in a nav mode. Now we've got a nice pink line there to Aheim, but we lost our white lines there from our Victor Airway. So they said direct Aheim, intercept Victor 8, or resume on Victor 8. And now we go to the flight plan. Look at this. We're going direct to a fix, but it's not a waypoint in our flight plan. And what's going to happen is we're going to get to Aheim in a minute and change here. I'll go ahead and pick it up fast. And the navigator is going to go, I don't know what to do. There's nothing after Aheim. You went direct to that waypoint, but it's not part of our flight plan. So while you're doing this direct to Aheim, my advice is to come down here and we'll put Aheim in the flight plan. So kind of clean up the mess we made. Sometimes it's easier to get something going in the right direction. Oops, let me spell this right.
You were going to type out Anaheim, weren't you?
I was. You know it.
Hey, well, while you're doing that, William said that he found what we might need in the AIM. It states if your equipment automatically decodes the identifier, it is not necessary to listen to the audio instruction. Right, and so the question is this considered automatically listening to the identifier? And in the 530, I think it is, and in the GTNs, GNS, I think it is. In the GTN, I'm not convinced. Gotcha. So now we added that waypoint into our flight plan, and we're going directly to it. And you can see now, as we get there, it's going to make this turn for us and intercept very nicely. But I had to type that in twice. So if you go directly to the flight plan and put it in there instead, it's one less time to enter it. Might be a little bit quicker for you. Okay, do we have any other outstanding questions that I can tackle at the moment? That's cute. There's 21 outstanding questions that are too complicated for me to answer. I'm not enough of an expert on these, but I'll throw some quickies at you. Why does my unit sometimes suspend while I'm flying to an initial approach fix? You're flying to an initial approach fix. I'd have to see what was in the flight plan. If you can be a little bit more specific with an example. All right, Gary, if you can phrase that. What comes to mind is if you're at an IAF that has a holding pattern at it. Although normally, in fact, I was planning on getting into that a little later here, is if say you've got a holding pattern that's at the beginning of the approach, and let me show you an example here. Let me stop this and pull up the one I wanted to play with tonight. Is this one. This is the RNAV GPS 26 in a Chino. And here we've got a holding pattern, a hold in lieu of procedure turn at Casby, which is the initial approach fix. Now, if I load this approach, I'm going to have Linden and Dewey and everything else in there. Normally, it's going to
do this hold in lieu of procedure turn. It's going to do a teardrop entry and push on in here. And the important thing to note is when you get inbound here, you need to look at that navigator and see, do you have suspend enunciated or not? If you see suspend enunciated, then it's going to stay in that holding pattern. If you don't see...
That goes along with another question we had about, and I'm sorry to interrupt like that, but flying an RNAV approach and going elect direct to the initial approach fix, I'm flying toward the fix within 10 degrees of final heading. How do I bypass the course reversal? Same thing, right?
Yeah, and I've struggled with this. I'm not sure I could tell you that I have a definitive answer on this. If this is a case where what my technique would be, if I was coming from out here in the east and I didn't want to do that course reversal, I would be inclined to activate the leg into Linden, which is going to basically give you an extended one out to the east and intercept that. You won't see Casby if you do that, but you'll intercept that course inbound. And the altitude is the same. You're still at 3,000 feet. Actually, Casby, you're at 4,400 because we got cumulogranite right here. So you definitely don't want to be at 3,000 feet. This is a
5.9 miles this side of Linden. You would know you're there. You're doing a little bit of old school.
Right, exactly. Now, if you did that, you would probably see in the flight plan, you could scroll up a little bit in the list of waypoints and you would see Casby. So it would show up there, but it's not really navigating to it, if that makes sense. There are some cases where it'll ask you if you want to load the procedure turn or not. In this case, if I were to load it from Casby and if I were out in this location, say to the southwest of Casby when I did that, it would probably ask me if I wanted to fly the course reversal. If I load it from Paradise, it would definitely put it in there because it's required. If I load it from Homeland, it would definitely not because it's no PT. So there's some little diciness around this.
And then Robert also said that suspend shows if GPS approach is activated, but you are in heading mode. And that would be an autopilot function, so I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, the GTNs, if you're headed, let's say you're on a vector on the downwind leg to it, it'll show suspend. The GNSs don't do that. But they won't sequence waypoints if you don't get close enough to the waypoint for it to sequence. And maybe that's when it shows the suspend.
It could be.
I still have some questions on some of these things too. So don't feel bad if you got them. I got them too. Okay. What else we got? Yeah, I see Bruce is asking about differentiating when to use the cursor knob versus the large knob on the GPS pages. And the basic rule of thumb I use is that the big knob moves the cursor and the little knob moves what's underneath the cursor, or changes what's underneath the cursor. And yeah, I struggle with that setting the brightness at night too. There is an automatic dimming feature on it, but the range might be set incorrectly for your installation. That's a setup menu thing, so you got to take it to your avionics shop to get in that setup menu. Or you might be able to find a copy of the install manual and find these menus yourself. But yeah, sometimes it's a little bit tricky. Yeah, I see these simulators. Andrew's asking about the real sim. That one I'm not familiar with specifically, but yeah, any of these will kind of give you at least the basics of the buttonology and which knobs do what. Probably the most common mistake I see is you push that lower right cursor button to give yourself a cursor, and then you type in something, and then you want to close that cursor, so you push it again. And that's like pressing the escape button on your computer, and it deletes everything you just typed in. So you type something in there. If you want to enter it into the box, you have to press the enter key. And I can't tell you how many, probably hundreds, maybe thousands of times that I press the cursor button again when I meant to press enter. And I don't make that mistake nearly as often as I used to, so I think eventually you do grow out of it. But yeah, it's just a frustration. I get it. Let's see. Let me pull up the simulator again here. Is it time to change the simulator over to a 530 yet? Let's see. Yes. Yeah, Dave is asking about the nav database effective date. I've run into this too. The database becomes available usually a week or so before the effective date. So what I typically will do is I'll bring my spare card home and I'll program it and it's ready. And if I inadvertently load that card before the effective date, so it's future data, it's not current yet, you'll still see the effective date in yellow highlighted because that's not the current data. So it's absolutely true. And the first time I saw it, I didn't quite understand it, but then I figured it out. And yeah, if that text is in yellow, it just means it's not current data. It might be old data or it might be future data. And you have to look at the date to see exactly what.
And Jay was asking, he has two 430W units, which were upgraded in 2010. Do they need to do software? And if so, how do you do this? Is that a whole new lesson or do we have that somewhere?
That's not something you can do. The software update has to happen at a Garmin dealer. And I took mine last time I did it at Advantage Avionics over at Chino, and I think they charged us something like $150 to update it. Don't forget, when you do that, you need a new flight manual supplement and you need a new pilot's guide, because when you got the new version with updated software, you have updated capabilities. So your documentation and your manuals need to document what those features are. Okay. I was going to do more holding there, but I'll just refer you to most of the holding and approach stuff was addressed in the program on instrument approach procedures. So check that. If you still have a question after having watched that, then fling me an email and I will try to answer it. One question I've gotten quite a lot was, we talked a little bit about the suspend mode with respect to holding patterns. That's one of the uses for it. There's about 5 different ways that suspend mode can be used. One of them is when you're flying an instrument approach and you get to the missed approach point, the navigator will go into suspend mode. And I'll tell you what, I'm going to close this. I'm going to bring up the simulator as a 530 now, because I want to show you, oops, got to close that really. Because I want to show you one of the main differences between the 430 and the 530 is this approach mode navigation. You can see it a little bit better. So here's my 530. Let me make the screen a little bit bigger. I'm going to turn it on. And we got our software version up here and the land database, etc. The problem with this is I can't have 2 instances, one that looks like a 430 and one that looks like a 530. I have to swap back and forth. So I got this effective date. Now we got our terrain database, the self-test, and here's our database effective date. So this is still ancient data. Here's our self-test, and that looks good. Got our flashing light, don't use for navigation. All right, let me give it some speed. And I'm going to just load an approach procedure in here to Fullerton. By the way, I suggest looking at the program on approach as I go into working your way through this menu quite a lot. And it's one of the easier ways I've found to select multiple approaches. Okay, so let me go direct to LAME. Just get this going, and then I'll go up to 3,000 feet. So we're going to make a hairpin turn out here. Actually, let me put us off on a heading, and I'll vector us around to this approach. I want to show a couple of things here. A lot of pilots will use vectors to final. As soon as air traffic control puts you on a heading and they say this will be a heading for vectors to final, they'll go onto this procedure page and they'll activate vectors to final. And I strongly suggest against this, and I mentioned this in several of the previous programs. The problem is, as we saw on that other approach, you lose situational awareness. You don't know where the step down fixes are. So you have to do a little bit more mental gymnastics to determine whether it's okay to descend yet. Instead, if you bring up the flight plan here and we come down here, we want to activate the leg into ACTAC. So We give ourselves a cursor, we scroll the big knob down there, and highlight ACTAC is the one that they're going to give you a vector to just outside of the final approach fix. Press menu, you get the activate leg prompt. Do you want to activate that leg from hover to ACTAC? Does that sound good? Yeah, that sounds good to me. So that's what we're going to do. Now we see our pink line over here. And if we're out here and we're looking at the chart, we know we can't descend below 3,000 feet yet outside of hover. Now we know exactly when we pass hover, so now we know when it's okay to descend to 2,700 feet. But what I want to show you is, while we're looking at this, notice on the HSI, we see this little green caret here is pointing at about 170, about 180 now. That's pointing to the active waypoint, this ACTAC fix. So that says we're just past a beam ACTAC. So that really gives you a lot of situational awareness and knowing where you are in the world. And I want to show you in particular this nav page 1. This is probably the biggest difference between the 530 and the 430 is this page. On the 430, we have all this same data, but we don't have this 120 degree or so compass rose. We don't have map data. So this is why I really like. Notice also we're in suspend right now because we're headed the wrong direction. This might be related to the question that we got about sometimes that is in suspend mode. When we get within, there it goes. It just cleared. So now we're going. It's going to sequence waypoints. I need to slow down a little bit here. We got our flashing light here. We got to set the course to 245. And I'm going to put nav. I should have done that sooner. It's going to activate this. Now, what I want to point out here is, okay, as we get within 45 degrees of this desired course here, it activates the approach mode. When the final approach fix becomes the active waypoint, you've heard me say this a million times, this is your approach mode enunciation. It's changed to reverse video. Our glide path starts indicating, and we can follow that glide path down now. So here we are on this approach, and I'll go ahead and speed up down final, and I'm going to play with the altitude here to get the altitude kind of close. The MDA on this approach is kind of high. This is an LNAV plus V, so it's not a precision approach. It's an MDA with a missed approach point. And I'll go ahead and descend now to the MDA 900 feet and let it motor on along here. Now, earlier I talked about the north up versus track up. This particular nav page 1 on the 530 is always track up. So some pilots might put nav page 2 on north up. So, it's going to complain about that terrain out there. I don't care about that. And maybe they'll put this one on track up. If you put this on track up and then bring this into your scan when you're flying, you're checking your primary flight display or your 6-pack instruments. If you just every now and again look over at the Navigator, you want to see this line straight up and down in the screen. I know I've mentioned this one before too. If that line is straight up and down in the screen, you are tracking that line and you cannot get off course. Makes it super easy. So we're motoring down here. This is one of the cases we're going to see the suspend show up when we get to the missed approach point at the runway end. And you see this little green caret is still pointing to the active waypoint, which is the runway, which is the missed approach point. When we get there in 30-some seconds, it's going to suspend waypoint sequencing at the missed approach point. And watch this green caret here. And as we get there, I'm going to slow down a little bit more because this is kind of important. Remember, if you're on a circling approach and you lose sight of the airport, at any point on that circle maneuver, you have to execute the missed approach. And you can't do it from just anywhere. The regs say, or the guidance says, the instrument flying handbook says to go back to the missed approach point. And that's where you start it from. So where's the missed approach point? And this is, I think, why the Garmin navigators go into suspend mode at the missed approach point. Watch this little area here. We got 1/10 of a mile to go almost. This little caret is going to always point to the active waypoint, which is the runway. So it says, okay, the missed approach point is that direction. That's the shortest direction of turn, is a left turn to get back to the active waypoint, and our waypoint sequencing is suspended. So obviously you wouldn't do this on autopilot, you'd be hand flying this. If you needed to go missed, you can start your left turn back around to the fix and go back to the missed approach point and then begin your missed approach. Now realistically from here, we could just intercept our course out here, push the OBS button, put it back in nav mode, and now the autopilot's going to track the course and we're going to fly our missed approach hole. Okay, let me see. Somebody had asked, a couple people had asked, how much easier is it to learn other navigators? And I don't know about you, Brian, but the first FMS or Magic airplane I learned to fly was very difficult for me. But then the second one was a little bit easier, and the third one was a little bit easier still. And each subsequent version is easier to learn than the last one. And I've found,
I think they play on each other, and you start getting away from tracking to a course and the VOR concept, and that you're flying a course and how they operate with the different nuances of, okay, what happens if I activate the approach or don't activate? Even in airliners, as you know, some of them you need to activate the approach and some you just have it part of your route. And it's the same with these things. It's just the little differences that you have to learn once you get the concept down.
Yep, same thing. And having learned one navigator, you know what it needs to be capable of. And there's actually an advisory circular that gives guidance on what you need to be able to do to feel comfortable with that navigator. You need to be able to activate a leg. You need to be able to go direct to a fix. You need to be able to load an approach, verify that you've got your navigation that you need, and so forth. Learning a new navigator is just slightly different buttonology. And I learned originally on a 737-300 model with an FMS, but no PFD. And then I learned 7576. And then I learned 777, back to a 73, the 800 model with nice screens. And now I'm on the 787. They've all been very similar. And so when I came over to back into the GA world and learned these, it was quite simple to do. The biggest difference, and then when I learned a 530, I had that down pretty well. And then I started flying with a GTN, a 750, 650. Those were so similar. Garmin makes them both. They have a lot of the same mentality, if you will, behind the buttons.
I would agree. I think they're getting more intuitive, but once you have the concept down, the theory is pretty much the same and translates along.
The one exception for me has been the Avidyne IFD. That's basically a horse of a different color, and I've had training on it. I've flown, I don't know, probably 25 or 30 hours on one, but I never feel comfortable in it. I've
flown them quite a bit, and I actually learned to like it. I'm not going to say better than Garmin because we know Garmin's monitoring this training. I'm kidding, but I do like it for other features. I like the readability of it and the font and all that. I like the look of it better.
Yeah, and you can put multiple approaches at multiple airports in it, and it's got Airways, Victor, and Jet Airways, and Tango.
They have
and
a great
Quebec.
simulator that works on the iPad, by the way.
Yes, they do. Absolutely. Now, one of the other questions I've gotten in several versions is, no, there is no iPad simulator for the 430 or 530, so you're out of luck. Somebody did ask me, what does the database cost? We're currently getting our nav database from Garmin. If you get a bundle that has the nav data, terrain, and obstacle, the United States is $450 as of earlier today. If you do the nav data only, that's about $300 a year for a subscription, or $129 for a single update. That's for US and Canada. And if you wanted to update your obstacle database, an annual subscription is $195, or a single update, which is what I do every couple of years, is $49. Call it $50. A couple of people actually have asked what to do if the nav data changes while you're in the air. Hopefully you've got two versions of the nav data, like I do with a spare card. You can just turn the unit off, take the database card out, plug the new one in, turn it back on. I don't recommend swapping it while it's on. I've heard a couple stories of this corrupting the card, and that's a bad thing. If you just have old data, then just let ATC know that you've got the old data. They'll try to, if there's a difference on the chart, and they usually do know those changes, they will let you know. I got several questions on the waypoint locked. Sometimes when you start the unit up, you'll get a message that says waypoint is locked. And what causes that is that you've got a waypoint in a flight plan or in a procedure somewhere usually it's in a flight plan. You added a waypoint that's been moved or changed, and it's in a new location, or that waypoint has been deleted, that VOR has been deleted. So if you go to the flight plan menu, you'll see it'll say locked on that flight plan. You can just delete the flight plan, or you can edit it and change it. Another way you get that waypoint locked is if you have user waypoints that are defined off of VORs. Let's say you've got a user waypoint that's a fix at, I don't know, the Podunk VOR 333 radial at 44 miles. And then they come out and they remove the Podunk VOR. Your user waypoint is now no longer valid because it's based off that waypoint that no longer exists. Let's see, somebody emailed me the other day about installing a new GNS. When this announcement for this seminar came out, they said, well, I was thinking about putting a 430 in my airplane, but I hear they're not going to be supported much longer. And my advice is these units are getting kind of long in the tooth. They're no longer manufactured. They are still supported. You can get them overhauled and repaired to a certain extent. But at some point, the parts that are required to do that are going to dry up, and we're not going to be able to get them fixed. So if I were doing a new install now, I would probably not put a GNS in an airplane. I'd go to a GTN if I had plenty of money. I'm good at spending your money. You can still find them if your unit breaks. Maybe you're better off buying a used one off of somebody else who took it out to put a GTN in. So that might be a reason that the used market still stays there. But at some point, we have to be realistic about it. These units are upwards of 20 years old, and they're not getting any younger, and neither am I. So let's see, what else do we have for Q&A here? You got something, Melissa?
Oh, well, there's one question about changing if you want to switch between Jeppesen and Garmin for data. I can't imagine that would be any big deal at all.
No, and we used to use Jeppesen data in my airplane, and then I was on my way to Oshkosh one year, and as soon as I crossed the Mississippi River, I discovered that the database ended. The Jeppesen data is split between East Coast and West Coast. You can buy the whole country, but it's a pretty big upcharge. And I tried to find the price for the Jeppesen nav data today, and I wasn't successful. I had to recreate an account to go do that. The Garmin data, on the other hand, is the entire country. So we started getting our data from Garmin, and when I flew to Oshkosh last summer, I had all my Wisconsin waypoints in there, and I was good to go.
I'm wondering if you have a subscription to ForeFlight and you're paying for Jeppesen database for that. Is that going to get you a database for your GNS?
I have heard that there are some package pricing deals available, but I have not researched it myself.
Okay. All right. If Carrie was asking if I have set activate leg from X to Y, what happens if I try to intercept that course outside of X? Will the CDI center?
Yes. Yeah, that's one of the techniques I've used quite often, and that works great.
Okay, cool. And Scott Saunders just posted up that I pay $450 for Jeppesen for the entire US.
Okay, wow.
Yeah.
So it's comparable. Let's see, Garmin was $450 also. And honestly, I like the Jeppesen download better. I can download it at home and transfer it to the card, and then just bring the card to the airport and put it back in the airplane. With the Garmin, I can't download it ahead of time. I have to have a live internet connection. So usually I'll bring my iPhone as a hotspot and download it on my laptop computer at the hangar.
Right, I've done the same thing.
Yeah.
Jerry asked if I'm approaching an RNAV approach, but I don't activate the approach, but I activate a leg within the approach, will that activate the approach? And I think I know the answer to that, but I'm going to let you answer it.
No, I was going to put you on the spot. What do you think?
I think it does.
Yeah, it does.
Or if you go direct to any fix on the approach, it will do the same thing.
Yeah, direct to a fix, it will once you get past that fix and onto the approach, it will automatically activate.
Right. But if you're halfway through your cross country and you put approach in and you hit activate approach, now you're going direct to the initial or final approach fix.
That's exactly right. Not the final approach fix. You're going to the initial approach fix that you selected.
Got it. Got it. Okay.
Yeah, that's a super common question. There is almost no case where you have to activate the approach. Probably 90% of the time you can, as long as you just navigate onto it. And the important thing is this. I mentioned this in the program we did on approaches. One of the last things you need to do before you get to the final approach fix is verify that you have the proper navigation. And I introduced a mnemonic checklist that I use over the final approach fix with a whole bunch of T's: time, turn, twist, throttle, tires, talk, and then I've added think. And that think is, do I have the correct navigation that I need for this approach? Do I have, if I'm doing an RNAV approach, do I have GPS enunciated on the navigator? Do I have it enunciated on the indicator on my panel? Do I have the little tiny reverse video LPV or LNAV plus V or whatever it is I'm using? Do I have that?
So you don't start thinking until you get to the final approach fix.
No, I do no thinking up to that point. That's right. Whatever you do, don't think ahead of time.
Here's a question that I think is a good one, because this is where it can all really go badly. And James says, I was on an IFR approach that I selected to finalize. The Chicago controller rerouted me to an alternative approach. I tried to cancel and then select the new approach without success. It was a mess in all ways. What's the best way to quickly change an approach?
Yeah, let me pull up the navigator again here. So we're on this approach, and we're still in this holding. First, let me show you my navigator so you can see it. So we're on this approach, and we got our waypoint here. We have this approach loaded, and we got into the end of it. How do we get onto a different approach or this approach again? If you're going to do this approach again, that's pretty easy. All you have to do is scroll back up in here, and let's say we want to go direct to Lamy and reactivate that approach. We're still in nav. It's going to turn. Notice now the navigation mode here says we're proceeding directly to Lamy. And if we look at our flight plan again, we're proceeding direct to Lamy, then we're going to go to Havre and ACTAC and so on the approach. So if you're doing the same approach, that's super easy. If you're going to go to a different approach, that's a little bit trickier. And the first thing is, while you're doing this, I would suggest you get ATC to give you a heading to start with. So just fly heading 020 and expect the localizer runway 24 to Fullerton instead of the RNAV. So now we go to the procedure. We're going to select a different approach. And it starts out assuming that you're going to go to the same airport. So you just want a different approach. So if you did want to go to a different airport, we have this cursor that's blinking in this approach box. You can just push the cursor button. If we have a cursor, it'll get rid of the cursor. And if you don't have a cursor, it'll bring it up. So in this case, we want to get rid of it. Now we've got our cursor blinking on the approach. We move this up to the airport, and we can twist in here. We want a different airport. So let's say we want to go to Seal Beach, or to SNA rather. We could do that. But if we just want a different approach, we can select the localizer. And we want this other transition, let's say WISUP. Now in this case, because we're already on an approach, it wants to get rid of an approach. So we don't have the option to load it. We can only have one approach at a time. So we can't load another approach at the end of our flight plan. The only option is to activate it. So, yep, we want to activate that. It's for guidance only. It's a terrestrial approach. Yeah, we want to do that. We go back into nav mode, and the GPS is going to navigate to WISUP, and we'll do the approach. So same sort of a thing. And there's another thing you could do. If you're going to shoot multiple approaches, I think I had one of these. You can make a flight plan that has only the airports that you want to do approaches. So a common one that I do here in my area is I come out of Fullerton, I go do an ILS to Orange County, I go do an RNAV approach into Long Beach, and then I do the VOR Alpha approach back into Fullerton. So I can just make a flight plan that has from Fullerton to Orange County to Long Beach to Fullerton, and then I can just activate you go direct to a fix, let's say, so direct to Camarillo, you activate that one, procedure, select approach. We're going to Camarillo, select that procedure, whichever one you want to do. We want the Kitech transition, let's say. We want to activate that one. We want to go directly there and start that approach. And then when we scroll down to the bottom of the list again, we should have had, oh, it messed with everything. Another option in there is basically select a procedure at the next airport if you have a bunch of airports in your flight
So
plan.
did it select the approaches for Camarillo because you're going direct to Camarillo, or because it was the last airport on your waypoint list?
It was the last airport on the waypoint list.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes, I see Monty asking about sometimes when you powered up the 430, it knows where you're located. Yeah, if once it's found its position, if you just bring up the flight plan page, it knows you're at whatever airport you're at, and it puts that in as the first waypoint. So, yeah, that's kind of handy.
He said
it just knows
it doesn't, though. How come sometimes it doesn't do that? Is it like me and it doesn't know where it is?
Yeah, that's my best guess. If you look at the map page and it doesn't have the position, it'll say no GPS position. You know, if you're inside your hangar, let's say. I don't have a good answer for sometimes it seems to and sometimes it doesn't.
Okay.
I don't look a gift horse in the mouth. If it knows, then that's cool. Adding a close-in fix not listed in the fix. So I see that Anonymous has re-asked his question. Yes, if you wanted to, so in this example I've got, I'm approaching Kitech. We're a little ways away. We're 40 miles away. But this is the only thing we have in here. And let's say we wanted to add another waypoint over there. Kitech is down there. Sadie. Okay. So there's a couple ways. You can go direct to Sadie. If you just press the direct button and start twisting it in there, twist and shout, get your new waypoint in here. So we're going to go direct to that intersection in the southwestern U.S. That sounds right. Yep, direct Sadie. Now, we've got direct Sadie. We press flight plan. We're not going to anything in here. So the question is, how are we going to get from Sadie to Kitech? And this is like the example I showed earlier. There's a couple of ways to do it. The one that makes the most sense is just to start out with this. Come to the flight plan, give yourself a cursor, and start twisting Sadie back in here again. So either way, you got to type Sadie in your flight plan or it's not going to automatically navigate from one to the other. So that intersection, accept that. So now we're going direct to Sadie, and then it's going to go direct to the initial approach fix, and we're good to go.
But the way you did it initially, at least you're navigating toward it. You get yourself going that way.
Yeah, exactly. You get started in the right direction. Now, in this case also, if we go to select approach, and we want to do that RNAV 26 Zulu again, if you scroll down a little bit, Sadie is already in there because that's a feeder fix onto the approach. It's not an initial approach fix, but it happens to be a feeder in this case.
That would have been an easier way to load it.
That would have been a way easier way to load it. But the example that he was asking about, I'm pretty sure, did not involve one that was on the plate at all. So
right, exactly.
The bottom line is you end up navigating to the fix, and then you got to close that gap somehow to get from that fix that you're cleared to onto the approach.
Makes sense. And Laurie asks, how do you display FSB weather?
Well, unfortunately, we can't in the simulator. It doesn't have that option. But if we did have it, if you go to the waypoint chapter here, if we got a message popping up, yeah, once this is set a course. In the waypoint chapter or group, normally it defaults to your destination airport is the waypoint that it's going to show you information about. So that's kind of handy. You're flying along and we're going to Camarillo. You'd like to know the name and the position, the elevation and all this stuff. Maybe you want to know the runway information, frequencies and so forth. If you have, in my case, I have a GTX 345 ADS-B transponder and I have a Flightstream 210. If you have one of those installed in your airplane and it's all wired correctly and configured correctly, you scroll over here a little bit to one of these other window pages, and there's a couple extra pages that show up in here. And one of those pages is METARs, and one of those pages is TAFs, Terminal Aerodrome Forecast. So the simulator doesn't show that because it's not a feature of the simulator. But if you look at the last program that we did was in part 8, I talk about in-flight weather resources. And this is one of the things I went into quite a lot of detail on that. I grabbed photographs and screenshots of a flight I did in June to Kansas City and a flight I did in July to Oshkosh. And I used the in-flight weather, the CONUS radar, the regional radar, METARS TAFs. I showed how to use a lot of that stuff in that program. So I would steer you to part 8.
Yeah, and I remember you doing that. Also, a lot of that translates to the GTN stuff, where if you want the weather for that airport, go to the information on that airport. So kind of think of it that way.
Yeah, exactly. One of the things you can do on the nav page here, if you have a GTN, if you go to menu and you, I think it's on this menu, if you have it installed, one of the options is to change map, and you can turn on the this radar data. So my technique in my 530 has been that I show the regional NexRad data on nav page 1, and on nav page 2 I show the CONUS data. And the reason is the regional data is closer range, and if I'm on the nav 1 page, I'm limited to closer ranges anyway. And on the nav page 2, I can zoom this out quite a lot farther. We can get to where we can see the whole country in here. And if you've got one of these off-board ADS-B in sources, you can see weather data from the whole country on there. So that's kind of cool. The regional data is better resolution but closer range, and the CONUS data is worse resolution but greater range. Okay, so I think we're just about done here. What I will say is a couple of suggestions for you. First of all, is you got to practice with these things. You got to just use them. You got to brute force them. You can't break them. I don't know of a way to break them. Let me rephrase that. They're pretty hardy units. They're designed to work. So my suggestion is you bring along another pilot to fly the airplane, or maybe an instructor. An instructor is trained in techniques for using the information as well as teaching how to use it. But have somebody else fly the airplane. Don't try to do it when you're solo in the airplane, because you're going to get so wrapped up in these screens, you're going to stop paying attention to that great big window outside with the real information that you really need to know. So bring somebody with you, ideally somebody who knows the equipment, but be careful with that because you don't want them heads down too much either. Let them fly the airplane, you work the box, figure that all out. Even better is if you can sit in the back seat and watch another pilot who's proficient with an instructor who's proficient, and you can learn a lot from doing that. That's what we're doing in my airplane now. I've got a new partner in my airplane who's trying to learn the 530, and that works great. When you're in this learning phase, don't bring a hood or a view limiting device. You don't need that extra distraction. It's not about flying the airplane. It's about manipulating the navigator and learning how to get the navigator to do what you want. You don't need that distraction. Practice with these simulators. Download the one there's the link on Brian's webpage or that I showed you earlier. Do this a bunch. I probably spent hours and hours and hours on that simulator, and I still do with the GTN and the IFD simulators. There are both simulators for those on the iPad that are great, and I use those a lot. I use them with my students to use it as a teaching tool. So if you can get something in ForeFly, in a Microsoft or X-Plane simulator, they have good simulators for these devices. They're not perfect, but they're good, and they'll get you well on the way.
I found if you use those, there are a couple of things that you get used to in the simulator, and then you go out the airplane and go, oh, hey, this is a little different. So there are some fidelity issues. I think they're cleaning them up, and I think somebody posted a simulator that works well with those online, and I think I put it in the chat. I'll put it on my website as well, another link that he suggested. Great. Yeah, watch out for the fidelity of those, because Garmin, like you said earlier, doesn't support those, or they don't give the software.
Right, they have to reverse engineer it, and I used to do software engineering, and it's hard enough to do forward engineering. It's really hard to do reverse engineering on some of this stuff. Chris is asking, any reason I can turn on most but not all the airspace alarms? Beats me. I don't know the answer to that. Yeah, okay. I see a question there about different lat long formats. Let me touch on that briefly. I had some notes on that.
Wish we'd standardize that.
Yeah, wouldn't that be nice? It's like I always say, though, the wonderful thing about standards is there are so many to choose from. So scrolling through this, if you go to the aux chapter or aux book, as Garmin calls it, give yourself a cursor. You're going to look down for units position. And you have position format is down here. If you were to make that format match whatever format you use in ForeFlight, your odds of being able to communicate back and forth would be much better. So you got a couple of different options here. I don't know what MGRS is or UTM. I'm sure somebody on board here knows, but you can use either decimal minutes or seconds and decimal seconds. That's how you change that. And then you could set it to a similar setting in ForeFlight. And let me just see if I can find it quickly on mine while we think about other questions. Oops. Yes, okay, so let me pop up my ForeFlight real quick, and that's going to take just a smidge longer here. So that'll be here in just a second. I use ForeFlight a lot. Most of my students do, so I've gone to using it. If you're in ForeFlight, and if I'm really good here, I'll turn my little external mouse on so you can see that. Come down here to more and go to settings. And if you scroll down here under preferences, you see units time. And in the units time, you got coordinates. So you can set this to the same number that you use in your Garmin and your Navigator. So that's one way to do that.
MGRS, Jeffrey says military grid reference system. I'm going to take that to the bank with me.
I'd buy that for $1. Yeah. And it seems to make sense. It's Greek to me. I don't know anything about it, so I'll take his word for it.
Yeah, and we'll be doing a lot more of this ForeFlight stuff soon, so get ready for that.
Yep, stand by on all the usual channels.
And UTM, Scott Saunders says, is Universal Transverse Mercator Coordinate System. That's exactly what I was thinking it was.
I knew that. I was going to say it, but you beat me to it.
Thank you for that. Always somebody that knows stuff. That's awesome.
Yep, that's, I don't know it all. I can't know it all, so I'm glad to have smart people like that in the room who will keep me honest. And okay, so let me pop up then. I'm going to have to do this. Come back to, we'll close it out here with, oops, and I got to get this screen out of here, get back over there. So here's my email for questions and comments about this or any other program that you see on my YouTube channel or anything else. As I said, Brian and I are both looking ahead to future programs. If you have any questions, suggestions, things you'd like us to cover or not cover, you can send them here. Brian, you want to give out your email address or you want to just have them send it here?
You can contact me through my website. It's the contact me button on captainshift.com.
Okay.
Which is linked in several places here.
Great. So questions to there. If you want wings credit for this and you're watching live tonight on January 5th, 2023, don't do anything. It's all handled for you. I'll automatically do that, usually within a couple of days. If you don't see your credit within 2 weeks, then send me an email and I will take care of it. And that email for wings credit is this one, the captainmikefast@gmail.com. And also, if you're watching this in a recorded form on my YouTube channel and you'd like to get wings credit for it, you can email me here. Just make sure that you include in the subject line that WP05118204. Those are zeros, not O's. I seem to get a lot of O's for some reason, and then the credit doesn't go through and I have to fix it. So send me an email with that number in it, and with the email address that you use on your FAAsafety.gov account. And give me a couple of days, a week or two maybe. In some cases in the off season, it might be a month. So send me that email. I'll get you the credit. I just did a whole bunch yesterday. And more resources. There's Captain Schiff's page on the GNS 101. If you chop the /GNS 101 off the end there, that's his homepage for the proficient pilot. All of his stuff is on there. Articles, YouTube videos, calendar of events coming up.
A lot of fun stuff. And if you're an instructor, there's a lot of tools on there underneath stuff, and Schiff's notes akin to Cliff's notes I have on there as well. Thanks for putting that up there, Mike.
Excellent. Yeah.
And we had a lot of outstanding questions, which I think Mike may go through and maybe send out an email to everybody or include some answers in there if you want to do that later. But we're out of time. We just couldn't possibly get to all of them. Yeah, and here's what we'll do. We'll finish up with the canned presentation here, and then I can open it up and we'll close out the recording and then go back through there. And if there's enough demand, enough interest in this, who knows? We might revisit and do another extra episode a little bit later on. I think there might be. I saw a couple questions about contributions. If you'd like to make contributions to help us defray the costs of the equipment that we use here, and mostly that Zoom account, Zoom's pretty proud of their subscriptions there. Send us a few shekels over this way and we'll put it to use. And like some of these people, thanks to all these people, gave us a moderate sized contribution. These people gave us a little bit bigger contribution. And my good friend Bruce gave us a huge contribution a little while back, and I had the opportunity. I happened to be driving through his neck of the woods last month, and I texted him the night before I was going through Newport, and was it Newport? Newburgh. And I said, hey, any chance you're free for lunch tomorrow? And we got together for lunch. It was great. So thanks for that, Bruce, and thanks for your contribution. Anybody else along the way, if you'd like to help defray our costs, consider what an hour of time with your favorite ground instructor is worth. And, a check about that size would be very nice for us. And that'll go towards defraying our costs for the upcoming programs, the 4-flight courses, and the GTN stuff that we'll be working on soon. So thank you so much. It's been a pleasure tonight and this entire series. It got way bigger than we thought. It took us a little longer than we thought. We had a few delays. But we're happy to do it. We're having fun with it, and we look forward to doing it some more in the future.